insulin resistant, I don't even notice anything, right? But then how come other people could take a microdose and they're like, whoa, no one's ever asked me that question.
Thank you so much for being back and joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having them. I definitely really appreciate these monthly tea on the GLP-1s and the questions, the questions, you being so plugged in the space. I appreciate the opportunity to answer and talk about what I do and what I'm passionate about. But with that, like overall, like what are the GLP-1 people asking,
And they are definitely asking. They're the influx of questions and more Dr. Jones, and the thirst of your information is just absolutely prevalent.
Awesome. Well, let's give it to them.
One of the bigger questions that we keep getting from the people watching your videos is, and it's something that I throw around this term all the time, and I don't actually have a firm understanding of, is insulin resistance.
And I think this is such an important term to understand because, in my opinion, this is the foundation of what metabolic health really is. And when people think about metabolic health, we're thinking about the energy utilization systems and what we're burning or what we're not burning, when we burn it. But what really affects that either positively or negatively is insulin resistance. And when you think about the correction and the path towards fixing these issues and the lifestyles and the GLP-1s and the peptides, like what are you fixing? Like in order to improve metabolic health, you're fixing insulin resistance. And insulin resistance leads to diabetes. Insulin resistance leads to obesity. Insulin resistance actually leads to the majority of the top 10 diseases that ultimately are the killers, for humans. And so this is also, by the way, when we think about GLP-1 medications, why people are like so enamored by the concept of like, wow, these medications there's like eight or nine different conditions, like chronic kidney disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and addiction issues, autoimmune issues, and GI issues, and the list goes on. Is it just because the GLP-1 is just this super magic thing that fixes all, or is it just that it fixes insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is the thing that leads to everything? And that's truthfully what I understand and how I see it, is that it really is insulin resistance that is just so important to correct and fix. And I think starting with an understanding of what it is. So,
well, that's exactly that. Could you explain to people what insulin resistance is?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, to understand it, we kind of take a step back and look at, well, what's insulin? So insulin is a hormone. People think of it as the diabetes, the blood sugar hormone, but insulin actually is an extremely powerful storage hormone, not just glucose, but carbohydrate, which glucose is carbohydrates. So it's not just carbohydrates, but it's actually protein and fat. Insulin is the most powerful anabolic hormone in the body, period. In fact, bodybuilders actually still, unfortunately, very dangerously so, will inject insulin to grow muscle, right? So it's not just a fat storage hormone. It is a storage hormone. Very, very powerful. And it's quite dangerous when bodybuilders do that because it's, too much insulin could literally put you in the hospital or ultimately create a fatality. So very, very careful if you're ever doing something crazy like that. But nonetheless, insulin is a storage signal. So insulin resistance is, like the name implies, a condition in which your body starts to become resistant to insulin. So another way to think of it is like, okay, so let's just say for all the carbohydrates you eat in a day, let's just say it takes your body 100 units of insulin that it needs to produce in order to get the job done. The job, again, is clearing the glucose, clearing the rise in the blood sugar, getting that sugar out of your blood into the cells, into the body. Well, as you start developing insulin resistance, now it takes 125 units, then it takes 150, then it takes 175, then 200, then 250, then 300. So it starts, the effect of the insulin resistance is the need to create more and more insulin. Okay. So the creation of more and more insulin is what ultimately leads to the condition, that this term hyperinsulinemia, which is just a fancy way of saying chronically elevated insulin levels. So that's the problem that insulin resistance creates, is leading to hyperinsulinemia. What leads to the resistance to begin with, I'll talk about lifestyle all the time because we know very well lifestyle is a huge driving factor. Mistakenly, though, some people will say it's the only cause, And that's definitely not the case. Like when we take a step back, even from like insulin resistance, it really starts in the mitochondria. Mitochondria is like the powerhouse of the cell, and mitochondrial dysfunction is really the starting point of resistance. And many things can lead to that. You have toxic exposure, like a bunch of endocrine disrupting chemicals. Um, and we're getting exposed and hit with that left, right, and front, and all the forms between what we eat and what we breathe, and even the air that we walk through with all this crazy EMF stuff going around us. So we have a lot of toxicity. We have a lot of stress too. So cortisol on its own can create elevated blood glucose, which can lead to the resistance. But the one big thing that I talk the most about, because it's the one that we have the most control over, is lifestyle. And so when I say lifestyle, we're talking about the things that we shouldn't be doing that we ultimately still do, like eating a bunch of carbohydrates, or it's the things that we're not doing that we should be doing, like some intermittent fasting, some heavy weight training, and building some muscle mass, and maybe eating less carbs and choosing more healthy fat choices, right? It's like we're not doing those things. And so there's a lot of lifestyle strategies that will create, on the short term, more insulin. And it's that chronic exposure to insulin over time, which ultimately leads to the resistance, but then the resistance leads to more insulin. So once you understand that, you see it's a circle, and it's this never ending cascade and progressive condition, which is actually why, like, medical practitioners, when they talk about diabetes, they think of it as such a progressive condition that there's no way to get out of it. And when you look at the mechanisms of insulin resistance, you can actually understand why diabetes heads down that path, because all that insulin resistance stuff is setting in before you even become pre-diabetic. That's when people start thinking of, like, that's a problem. And then it's pre-diabetes, and then it's diabetes, and then it's a little bit of metformin, and then it's more metformin, and then it's a second medication like a sulfonylurea, or maybe a third medication like a glipizide. And then now you're an insulin dependent diabetic. First it's a little bit of insulin, then it's more insulin. Why the hell is it so progressive and downright impossible to get out of to many practitioners that aren't familiar with how to get out of it? Is the very essence of what insulin resistance is, because we just talked about it earlier. If we go all the way back before you became pre-diabetic, it was this right here. It was the lifestyle, the stuff, that you should be doing, the stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Insulin, 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 and which is obviously from blood sugar rising, insulin rising, that resistance sets in. And so your body's fighting this for years, years and years. They say on average about 3 to 6 years that your body is fighting the development of insulin resistance as it gets worse. Meanwhile, you get your blood work checkup, and you think everything's fine because they don't do a test for insulin resistance. They only do a fasted, they do an A1C and a glucose level, right? So until you finally see your A1C rise, which is the 90-day average, or your actual blood glucose rise, you think everything's fine. But for the last 3 to 6 years, you've been becoming more and more insulin resistant. And they would have never caught that unless, you presented with symptoms and you were with a wise doctor that understood insulin resistance compared to diabetes, or they were checking the marker fasted insulin and or C-peptide, which would have caught that to begin with. So I know it's like a lot to think with, but those are like the core pieces. And if you can understand that relationship, then it makes sense. Just a lot of things, like the progression of it, why GLP-1s are so amazing, because they actually improve this condition, and so many other things.
So is what you're saying is that you have the insulin resistance first, and then after that point you develop the diabetes? Is that the progression cycle of insulin resistance?
Yeah, and obesity too. And with the obesity, I would like with diabetes, it's very well understood. There's no controversy over that. It's insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes, yada yada yada. With obesity, though, this is the controversial one, because if you're familiar with Dr. Jason Fung, who wrote the Obesity Code, and many other key opinion leaders in the space, they'll tell you exactly what I believe, which is obesity is just as much a disease of insulin resistance as diabetes is. It's just a matter of one person might go down the obesity path, somebody might go down the diabetes path. Most people go down the middle path, which is both, and they call that diobesity. It's an unofficial medical term for being obese and diabetic, but
What did you call it?
ultimately, diobesity
Oh, I love
is yeah. So representing the both happening at the same time, and so of course, there are many variables within the individuals that might affect them going one way versus the other. Then we have the genetic piece to it as well. I really do believe that obesity has a certain, every individual, their obesity has a certain percentage of it where you can say it's genetic based, because there's been plenty of studies to look at the genetic contributing factors with obesity and isolating it, that very clear Danish studies that looked at that. But I look at that as like okay, so some person might have a little bit of genetic based obesity, the rest is lifestyle. Someone else might have a larger percentage of their obesity being genetics, but they're still like, I've never seen 100% genetic based obesity. I don't think that exists. I haven't seen it. I've just seen extreme versions where, all right, you are really going to have to try like really, really hard. You probably are going to have to be on a GLP-1 for the rest of your life because you have a lot of heavy genetic based obesity, and we're limited with how much we can do with lifestyle, but we can still go as far as we can. And for those people, it's like getting them to a microdose is my goal, versus someone else where it's like, you're not even like, there's no genetic basis to this. Like we're going to fully fix this if you're willing to put in the work and get you off entirely, if that's your goal, to get off entirely. So
And you mentioned there's blood tests. Are there blood tests to test for insulin resistance?
yeah, and it's fasted insulin and C-peptide. So, and it's pretty logical to make sense of why that would tell you, right? It's when you're, so let's take a step back and look at, we talked about when you eat, blood sugar rises, your body releases insulin, and insulin levels drop. Well, if you're fasted, your insulin should be low. Not zero, because you always have to have a little bit of insulin, but it shouldn't be high. It should be low. It shouldn't even be baseline. Like your insulin should be on the lower end of the reference range if you haven't eaten for 8 hours. And then C-peptide is just another version of insulin, of the fasting insulin. It's just the insulin marker is a little unstable. So they're both testing the exact same thing. C-peptide is more of a confirmatory test of the fasting insulin. And those are just not on standard panels at all. And so that's why, insurance doesn't cover them. They're really inexpensive tests, though. I mean, you can go to my clinic, for example, and get a fasting insulin and C-peptide for freaking $40.
Oh my goodness.
And it's such a powerful test.
Huh. Why do you think that they don't standardize that type of testing, since it's so obviously so important?
I mean, the same reason why they only do TSH for thyroid and they're not doing the free T3, free T4, reverse T3. And this is where you get into the making strong guesses for stuff that obviously I can't prove, and none of us are ever going to have the true answer, right? Like, is there financial related decisions that alter the decisions and limit how much that these decisions are made based off of what's best for people and their health, and what's going to make versus what's going to make big corporate some money? And I'm not going to speak totality among things that I cannot prove, but I'll let the people be smart enough to draw their own conclusion. So it's either that, or the other argument would be, all right, here it is, right? Well, the research doesn't prove that those tests do exactly what you're saying they do, so that's why we don't use them. And then my counter to that is, well, because you don't do the damn research on the damn test that I'm talking about to prove that they could be used. So of course, it's like, again, but I have to, always contain myself, my overexcitement and passion behind speaking against these problems that exist. And I think that's what I believe. And I'll go toe to toe with anybody who really thinks that there's other reasons. And I love to hear them, right? Give me some actual reasons why those are not being tested, because I'd love to hear them. But right now, that's all I got for you is I think they're purposely not tested for a reason.
Well, that makes sense. It's in line with a lot of other things they don't test or do until you're already there. So, okay, so we've established what causes insulin resistance, like what causes it, what it could lead to. So, and if I were to come to your clinic and not know anything about insulin resistance, and then through your blood work, understand that now I have that and the dangers of that, even diabetic or not diabetic, what's the next step? What do you do with that information?
Yeah, well, I think it's important even before we get into the solution. Now let's like really bring it back to GLP-1s. And because GLP-1s are absolutely part of my solution. And so what do GLP-1s do? They reduce insulin resistance. They also reduce inflammation. They also reduce food chatter. How are they reducing food chatter? Part of how they do that is by fixing insulin resistance. Look at the symptoms of a person who's insulin resistant. They're tired all the time. They're brain foggy. They're hungry, right? Why is an insulin resistant person who has all that fat on the body unable to utilize that fat for energy? Well, what do we say insulin does? It's a storage hormone. Store, grow, grow, grow. So how am I going to get the body to grow? I'm going to make you eat more. There's your food chatter. There's your hunger. And then I'm also going to, I don't want you to expend a bunch of energy because I need that energy to grow. So I'm going to make you tired. I'm going to make you wake up and feel like shit. It's like insulin's doing its job. Remember, insulin is not supposed to be chronically elevated all the time. And this is really, really important to understand. So if we had this graph, maybe you can throw it up with your amazing editing skills for people to look at like a 24-hour period and look at little spikes of insulin. Even if you were eating like crap, 6 meals a day of just crap, you have these massive spikes of blood sugar. If you are insulin sensitive, which by the way, being insulin sensitive is the same thing as not being insulin resistant. Sometimes people ask that question and it's a fair question. We're saying the same thing. It's just you're either insulin sensitive, you're in the middle, or you're resistant. So even if you're eating 6 meals a day of just high sugary crap, if you looked at the graph of 24-hour period and you saw and you measured when whether insulin was high, you would see six peaks and then back down, and then goes up and then goes back down. And they'd be, for an insulin sensitive person, they'd be very thin, meaning over a 24-hour period, you still wouldn't have that many hours of the day where you actually had insulin levels elevated. But then, and that's what you would see on a really insulin sensitive person. But then year 2, year 3, year 4, when the fasted insulin levels start to rise, that graph starts changing from these thin peaks to wider, wider, wider. And then the in-between areas where there's no insulin starts becoming thinner, thinner, thinner. And then it just meshes together where you are full-blown insulin resistant, aka diabetes, where it's just doesn't even matter when you eat. Now you have this baseline of insulin, which then spikes every time you eat, and then it never comes down. And it's just the graph morphs. It'd be really cool. I've never seen a graphic, but it'd be really cool. That's actually one graphic that I kind of want to create myself because I've never seen it representing that and seeing that change between spikes of an insulin sensitive person versus somebody who's resistant. But that's what's happening. And so that's why a person who tries to start on a lasting weight loss journey, it's so hard because they're so resistant. It creates those symptoms that we talked about, the food chatter. And, we've seen how unsuccessful people have been on this battle on obesity. So now come GLP-1s. And for the first time ever, we have this powerful medication. I call GLP-1s more like a peptide / medication, kind of a morph in between the two. And it gives some pretty instantaneous reduction in that resistance, reduction in blood glucose levels too as well, closer to baseline. So the food chatter reduces, and now they can execute. Now they can execute and implement those changes, those lifestyle changes that we talked about earlier. And I think it's so crucial. I want to share this analogy that I've started saying because I think it helps with visuals, and I'm trying to get better at giving visuals as well. But I think of insulin resistance like a boulder on top of a hill, and you push that boulder down and it has a certain velocity, has a certain speed. And then as more time passes, the speed picks up, right? So at any point to stop the boulder, it would take a certain amount of force. So if the boulder starts, you just started becoming insulin resistant, it takes this much effort. But if you wait and you let the boulder pick up speed, if you wait and let your insulin resistance, your 1 year, 2 year, 3 year take, that boulder is picking up a lot of momentum. It's picking up a lot of speed. So now that the process of stopping it is harder and harder and harder. So I think of GLP-1s like this crazy, I forgot the name of the military helicopters that can just come in and drop like a really big claw to grab the boulder and like lift it up and bring it up the boulder and bring it up the hill. And if you are not that insulin resistant, well, guess what? The boulder picks it up. It wasn't that heavy. It has enough energy to drop it all the way at the top and you're good to go. That's why some people can have transformative results and all they had to do was just jump on a GLP-1. And then you have other people where like it helps, but that boulder was going so fast, the helicopter just did not have enough power to take it all the way up. So the helicopter gives up, drops it, but at least where it drops it, now the boulder's slower. So now all the other, versions of this metaphorical helicopter would be able to kick in. And that's your fasting, that's your keto, that's your weight train, that's all the other things too as well. So I found that when I explained it this way, that people were telling me that they kind of that helped them kind of understand it better. So that when we kind of get into the treatment, like it makes sense. Give me that helicopter, slow down the boulder, give me a fighting chance here so I can get ahead.
Do you think that maybe that's why some people respond differently? Like you have the people, they take it and then immediately on the lowest dose, they're just feeling it. And other people are like, yeah, this is nothing.
100%. I think that the sensitivity to the appetite suppressing effect, right, which is what everybody can think with, is directly correlated to how metabolically busted they are. Metabolically busted being the unofficial term for insulin resistant and inflamed. So I think, and that kind of gels really well with the concept of microdosing, like microdosing using a much lower dose than the starter dose. If you're insulin resistant, you take a microdose and you're like, I don't even notice anything, right? But then how come other people could take a microdose and they're like, whoa, because of their baseline insulin resistance and inflammation, their baseline metabolic health. They are optimized enough to where all they need is a microdose. And that's exactly why the end goal is very, very possible after we fix people through the program and the coaching and all this stuff. 3 months, 6 months later, we can get them to like from whatever dose we had them on, which is not that high to begin with, 5, maybe 7.5, the highest, and get them back down to 2.5, get them back down to maybe 2.5 every other week. And they can actually like maintain with that, but we had to optimize them to that same point. So I think if it works out on the back end that you need less to feel it after we improve your health, and it would make sense to me on the front end if you started and you were already not that far off, that you would have the same effect. So yes, I think that's exactly why we see these differences.
Well, when you explain it like that, it makes sense. But I think there's a lot of people out there that are taking these drugs and like, well, I don't understand. Well, it's working so well for everybody that I see on YouTube and TikTok, but it's not working for me. And it's up till now, this is probably the first time, I know it is the first time that I've heard anybody explain this as a probable cause as to why.
Yeah, I think, and we certainly should make other podcasts about the other categories. The 4 main reasons why people get these slow or non-existent results. The primary is always just they're too insulin resistant for their starting point. Number 2 is excessive levels of inflammation, which that could be driven by an autoimmune disease, an inflammatory condition, Lyme's, PCOS, like non-autoimmune inflammatory conditions too. The third one is thyroid. You just have a clinically hypothyroid patient. It doesn't matter what else you do. Like they need that thyroid support. And then finally, cortisol. You could have everything dialed in, but if you're just stressed to the gourd, physical or there's some other stress, then cortisol is just going to keep your blood glucose high. And cortisol just goes back to insulin, by the way. So you can almost call cortisol like a subcategory of insulin. Thyroid is its own thing. Inflammation kind of meshes because inflammation drives insulin resistance drives inflammation. But I give it its own category because of the fact that, like I said, you might have a separate inflammatory condition and you got to give them some more support, like low dose naltrexone, for example, is we could talk about that in a later episode, but a lot of cool things, a lot of cool gadgets and tools. And it's just understanding how to navigate around them and having the same, like the narrative, right? Like what's the narrative for us? It's like, these are tools, and the agenda is we just got to figure out the right combination of tools to get the job done, which is always going to be permanent lifestyle change. Like whether it takes you 3 months or 6 months or 1 year to get it all in, that's on you. But let's make that journey. Let's start that process and get the person there as fast or as slowly as they need to or want to.
Just touch on cortisol real quick. The correlation between all of this and cortisol, and maybe just briefly what it is and how it affects your body and how it affects the insulin resistance or sensitivity.
Yeah. So cortisol, stress hormone, it's supposed to be, just released in a true stressful, like, they always bring the tiger up, like, and all the things I've ever seen, animations, like you're walking and you see a tiger, like, what are you gonna do? Not that you're ever gonna outrun a tiger, but your body's gonna pump out as much glucose as it possibly can. You're gonna pump out a bunch of stress hormones. You're gonna be like totally dialed in because your life depends on running as fast as humanly possible. That's what cortisol does. It is the override hormone. It is supposed to be life or death, might be extreme, but super intense situations where the damage that it does in order to get you the glucose and to get you the strength and the speed and the thinking high at the highest level, it's life or death in that moment, right? So you need to have a hormone in the body that can do that. Well, if it's that powerful, obviously it wasn't meant to be chronically elevated. So chronically elevated cortisol is the end all be all effect as far as it does many problems, but the main one and to make it more easy to understand what we're talking about, the one big thing that it does is it keeps your glucose elevated. So now you have a pathway towards elevation of glucose, independent of diet. You could do all the other things that we know will help insulin and blood sugar levels, not eat any blood sugar at all. But if you're constantly spiking cortisol, that will cause your blood glucose to rise. And even worse, if you're not eating the glucose, where do you think it's getting the glucose from? It'll break down anything it can. It'll break down muscle tissue. It'll break down cartilaginous tissue. It is a powerful hormone, not one that should be spiked outside of when it should be, which is every 24-hour period. You should have a nice cortisol spike in the morning. That's what wakes you up. That's, cortisol and glucagon together spike your sugar up naturally. Diabetics call this the dawn phenomenon. They always wonder why their blood sugar is much higher in the morning, but non-diabetics have this too, a little bit of a rise in blood glucose. It's also why skipping breakfast is just, for me, so intuitively, like your body kind of feeds itself. You don't need to eat breakfast. Your body literally pumps glucose out. It's like, why would you eat? So, but we've talked about that in the past. So yeah, cortisol, and there's many things that will lead to cortisol. Mental and physical stress is kind of the way we summarize them all, but it is its own pathway towards elevated glucose, which then is elevated insulin. And now we're back into the insulin bucket, the insulin resistant bucket.
Is elevated cortisol levels, is that something that's easier to fix than insulin resistance?
No one's ever asked me that question. I think that let me really think about that one. I would say that it is probably easier to fix. I think there's less things to be looking for. Although there's a lot of nuance, and it definitely depends for sure. What we do is just assume that there's an area to improve. I kind of think everybody has a little extra cortisol nowadays since COVID and what's going on in the world. And, your favorite guy is the president now. Not your favorite guy, but people's favorite guy. And it's a total joke, by the way. I'm not a pro-Trump guy by any means. That was actually the point of my joke there, is people's cortisol spiked probably through the roof because, they would rather have a man that's cognitive abilities are not even there apparently over him. But in any case, there's a ton of stressful things happening in life. And so I approach it where it's like, we could go down that rabbit hole and test it. And if you want to test cortisol, there's definitely a time or place. Blood is not accurate because you want to look at the whole the rhythm throughout the day, the cortisol rhythm. So it's like a salivary or a urine test 4 times throughout the day. It's really cumbersome. It's not cheap. It's actually one of my functional mentors that I refer patients to that need that level. I just let him do that. I don't do that anymore in my clinic, but I just put people on a stress management protocol anyways, because I think we can all benefit from it. And if we feel like the person is like, okay, why are they not budging? Then we start going back to it's like, maybe it is. And then we find out like, I actually really am stressed, or I do have a lot of stress. If the patient can regurgitate that information to us in the beginning, then we are going to focus on that. Because sometimes it's easy to know, like, I'm stressed. This is unusual. My kid is sick. My spouse I'm going through a divorce. I might lose my job. I lost my job. I mean, okay, fine. If you know those things are going on, then we know. Let's target stress and put you on some adaptogenic herbs right away. Like my favorite is adaptocrin. It's got some really good from Apex Energetics. It's got some really good adaptogenic herbs in there. Then put you on a stress management technique, like something like breath work, journaling, mindfulness, meditation. There's so many stress apps. And then the one that people don't talk about, because I always like to just be the guy that's like I'm going to tell you what you need to do, whether whether you want to hear it. I'm gonna try my best to tell it to you in a way that is more receptive to you with where you're at. But I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And you just got to, people need to hear this. Is like, what is the stressful situation? Oh my gosh, my child is just screwing up right now, and I can tell that there's no direction. It's like, okay, well, what are you doing to fix that? It's like, what? You know what I mean? Like, have you actually sat down and really tried, or is it just a problem that you're kind of ignoring? Like, you got to tackle these things in your life that are creating stress. I'm not going to say you're going to solve it, but there's this whole like, and this gets really philosophical too. Some people believe this, can think with it. Some people think it's too woo woo. Take it for what it is. But when you have a crossroads or a problem, and you choose to not do something about it, like you don't take a cause over it. You don't try to do something about it. When you choose to not do something about a problem, even if the problem isn't actually creating a problem for you right now, and that's why you like, oh, I can handle it later. The fact that you're not handling it now has this sort of like unspoken of change in, and I get, very spiritual with this, but it changes your energy and your frequency around you. And that'll manifest into your health. And so when you can, even just sitting down and going, okay, I'm going to tackle this January 1st. Great. You made a decision to go, even just doing that it's like, oh, okay, cool. On a subconscious level, you have a solution in motion, even if it's just simply sitting down and putting on the calendar that you're not going to blow past January 1st, but you're actually going to try to tackle it. That is in of its own a remedy. So a lot of, I don't even know how I got down that path, but there's a lot of cool things you can do for stress, and you should work on this if that's an issue.
No, it's just super interesting in stress management. It's just funny, all these things we know that are bad for us, but I think a lot of people, or I'll just speak for myself, I didn't know how much they directly affected potential weight loss or weight gain. So it's interesting to hear your take on that. I had a question. Did people that wear the continuous glucose monitors, is that a way to be able to tell if that person's insulin resistant or not with those CGMs?
Yeah, I think it's another way for sure. I love CGMs, and it we don't require it. And a lot of people ask like that, or the Lumen device is another cool kind of biometric device. Tells you what kind of energy you're burning, fat or carbs. But uh, you can, right? Because if you're noticing higher levels of blood glucose in times when you're not eating, it could definitely be another way to look at what's going on. What is your baseline glucose when you're not eating, and what's your glucose doing when you're eating, and comparing the two. There's definitely patterns that are associated with insulin resistance and, of course, diabetes. So
And then for the people that maybe don't have access to that, what are the symptoms and side effects? I know you touched on, but just lay them out. What are the symptoms and side effects to your being insulin resistant?
yeah, I mean, the big ones are just being tired, lower energy, tiredness, exhaustion, brain fog, belly fat, dragging yourself out of bed, feeling like the body is working against you when you are trying to lose weight. Like, and this happens to women a lot, specifically when they hit menopause. It's like when menopause happens, there's like this instantaneous increase in insulin resistance. And that's a whole nother conversation. But when you notice all of a sudden, like the things that you used to be able to do to be able to drop the fat and drop the weight just don't seem to work as well or at all, or you lose the weight, but you just gain it back so damn fast. And it's like, I think of it as the body's working against you versus working with you. And I definitely would love to do a deep calories versus hormones, AKA insulin, like basis of obesity podcast with you. Cause that's one of my big, strong um, positions right now in the space, is my take on how do I refute the highest level of research right now that says it doesn't matter. You don't have to keto. You don't have to fast. Just get caloric deficit. That's it. And you have people like Dr. Mike Israetel and Dr. Lane Norton, geniuses in the space. It's like, I'm not smarter than them. I don't think I'm smarter than them, but I do think I have at least confidence, and they might smash me, and I joke because I'd love to get on a podcast and have them answer that question to me. But it's like, okay, we have that. I don't think that research is wrong, by the way. I think that we're misinterpreting it. So that's my thesis right now, and my hypothesis is that the research that shows it's all about calories is true, but it's not applicable to real life, because in real life, so what if the research shows all I got to do is get into a calorie deficit? In real life, can I actually get into the calorie deficit or not? And things like hunger, I can't control when I'm hungry and how hungry I am. I can't control how many calories I burn at rest. Like, of course, I can consciously do my best to try to get my ethics in and have a really tough mindset. But at the end of the day, I'm guilty and victim of what my body does. And the cues, like insulin's going to win that battle every day, all day. It's going to win the battle. And I think the stats on obesity show that. And I think GLP-1s confirm that, because it's like, why are these things so powerful? But we should definitely get into that for another podcast.
Have you had any
That's one of my.
women that have come into your clinic, maybe in that perimenopausal range, on a GLP-1, and when they go into more of a formal menopause area, that they've had to increase their GLP-1s due to what you're talking about?
So with menopause, with the big shift in specifically decrease in the production of estrogen, progesterone, even testosterone, their definite insulin resistance increases, and so they'll need more of kind of everything. And so I think the magic bullet for them is definitely the GLP-1, but that's where the AOD really AOD is amazing for everybody, but and I know we talked about that before, but AOD, especially for someone like a woman that's in menopause, I think that's because it really allows them to get into the fasting, to get into the keto without their body fighting them so much.
Some people may not have seen the AOD part of it. Explain to them maybe just the synergistic part of menopause and GLP-1s with AOD, and maybe just briefly what AOD is.
Yeah, so AOD is a fragment of the human growth hormone, and specifically, it's the fat mobilizing portion of growth hormone. So growth hormone does all these cool things, but then one thing it does is it stimulates the mobilization of free fatty acids. Okay, great. Well, mobilization is like the prerequisite, the pre-step to burning. We're always burning and gaining. Whether we lose weight, is the net effect of the burning is more than the gaining, right? And that's calorie deficit. The research proves that, you know. But so we know that we have to be at a deficit. But this is where the concept of, is the body working with you or against you, comes into play. And now we can put it all together in this conversation. So I'm glad you asked these questions, because now we can think with cortisol. If you put yourself into a calorie deficit and you are insulin resistant and you're doing strategies like intermittent fasting and keto, well, now you're demanding your body to mobilize fat. And if it sucks at mobilizing fat, because that's the definition of insulin resistance, remember, not so much insulin resistance, but just having chronically elevated insulin levels. Store, grow. So I'm going to block the ability to mobilize fat. Well, if you're in a deficit, I have to mobilize something. Here comes cortisol. And now cortisol spiking. So now I'm actually really glad you kind of asked the questions you did, because we're putting it together in a single conversation and can give enough context. The reason why you hear things like fasting's not good for women, or people with Hashimoto's and autoimmune diseases, in my opinion, is only because of the inability for that body to mobilize fat fast enough, which that's the stress for anybody who's fasting, is the ability to mobilize the fat fast enough. But somebody who's not insulin resistant, who's not autoimmune, or who's not in menopause or PCOS, they are fat adapted and metabolically flexible enough to handle that. It's still going to stress them out. They're still going to spike some cortisol, but their threshold is higher. This term that I kind of coined is stress threshold, and it refers to exactly how much stress a particular body can handle at a given time. And that's going to be the result of, I think, a little bit of mental toughness, but also your existing health status. How sick are you? How stressed are you? How inflamed are you? And conditions like PCOS, menopause, and, autoimmune diseases, you don't have that much room. And so if you start adding the fasting, you better be careful. You better be slower. You better listen to your body. It's not that fasting's a problem. It's just that you are sensitive to it throwing and being too much for you. But here comes AOD, the magic player, to bridge the gap and allow you to really sink your teeth into the fasting. That's absolutely necessary. Because remember, you don't have to fast, is what some people will say. I for 20 years of helping people lose and achieve lasting weight loss, if you're not insulin resistant, sure, you don't have to fast. No problem. But that's your young and less sick people. They're lazy. Just eat less and move more. You're going to lose the weight. We're not talking about young people that just recently gained weight. We're talking about overweight, obese, metabolically busted, deranged people, your moms, your dads, your parents, all these people, like a world to fix their metabolic health without fasting. It just seems like kind of crazy to me. Very challenging, downright impossible. Possible, but really, really hard, so.
No, I'm glad we tied it all together too. We're insulin resistant, maybe pre-diabetic. So what's the fix? How do you go about fixing it? What's your methodology in your clinic?
Yeah. So just tying it all together, through the cooperation of my medical providers and me and my coaches, we're putting people on the lowest dose that we can, which for most people it's the starter dose because we talked about that. And then we put them on AOD 9604 or some sort of fat mobilizing agent. Other growth hormone peptides could work, like a Semorelin, a Tesamorelin, or a CJC 1295 ipamorelin combo, something to aid their mobilization of fat. But if they're starting with us and they're like, what do you recommend? I always recommend AOD. And my providers are on the same page. And then as they're getting started with those two compounds, we start the flow protocol. We're not getting people into deep rounds of fasting right out the gate, but we get them
What does flow protocol stand for? Because you have your
Yeah. So flow, people, it's spelled floa, pronounced flow, fasting like our ancestors. So, when I started this whole thing, it was all about fasting, and like that was everything, and it still is the most powerful tool that I have. But I think that it's part of and that's why I've kind of expanded it to the 10 pillars of lasting weight loss. And as I've gotten more confident and refined this protocol and work with more people, the mental piece of where the individual is at is probably the most important variable. If you're excited to fast, then let's roll. If you get anxiety about the idea of fasting, all right, well, then let's start with keto. And can you eat breakfast 2 hours later? How about that? And when they do that, it's like, okay, can we, and then we just kind of slowly, before they know it, they're fasting for 36 hours. And they're like, holy shit, where'd that come from? If you would have told me I'd be fasting for 36 hours, I would have been like, you're out of your mind, Dr. Jones. But here I am.
Yeah, it's a hard sell at the very beginning.
It is. And so, it's baby steps or leaps if the individual wants to do leaps. I'll move at the rate you want to move. And that's really how I approach it, is moving with the individual at the rate that they're ready to move. So
I think it's a really good point that you bring up, that it's not like all or nothing. Because I think, I've heard from other people like, oh God, Dr. Jones says fasting. It's like for 4 weeks, so, some exaggerated number. And I don't think I've heard it for that. You can just start in like little intervals, like, move breakfast back and then add gin to this.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think when people catch me on social media, they'll see that and so they'll try to do it on their own, and then they jump into the 48. It's like, okay, well, some people could, but a lot of people, it would make more sense because they're so metabolically out of it to take their time and work into it. Let the AOD sink in, let the GLP-1 start, focus on the nutrition. Eating less processed foods is number one. And then when you're choosing those foods, just lowering you don't need carbs. Like carbohydrates, you don't need a single carb for the rest of your life. And that's like, right, just understanding that concept. Like, I don't need carbs. No, you don't need carbs. Now, am I going to put you on a program that's saying, hey, no carbs for the rest of your life? Like many respected key opinion leaders that I have so much respect for, like Dr. Ken Berry is the first one that comes to mind. Absolutely love him and think it's great, carnivore, keto. But it's like, okay, where's the sustainability in that? If our goal is to help the masses, and your solution is just so the threshold of mental toughness for somebody to get into that, I'm thinking bigger picture. So I absolutely love what he does. I'm just like modifying it because, well, personally, if you can ask everybody, can I achieve health and have some carbs in my life at the same time? Everyone's going to want that. So do I.
Yeah.
And so I live a carb cycling lifestyle, or keto cyclic, and I think that's my goal for everybody, is to get them to a keto cyclic. If some people can fix this and handle and have carbs every day, that's cool too. But I think living a keto cyclic lifestyle will help keep you insulin sensitive among the fasting, the weight training, and everything else.
What does that mean? Keto. What did you say? Keto
Cyclic,
cyclic?
yeah, keto cyclic or cycling keto. It's kind of the same concept of carb cycling, but with an emphasis of actually trying to go keto for like. So, for example, what I do, this is how I live my lifestyle, and how a lot of my people in my community live their lifestyle is 4 days out of the week, you're trying to go as low carb as you can. You're keto for 4 days. Those are the days that you're not lifting. Those are your busy days. Those are your work days. You throw a fast in there. More fast, more keto, more busy. It's easy. And then the other days, that's where you lift weights, and that's where you have your carbs. And so for me, with the exception of a holiday, yada yada yada, because I have more wiggle room because I'm in maintenance now, I really try to adhere to that. Where it's like, especially if I plan on having a lot of carbs, I'm going to get a really good weight training session, because when you resistance train for about 24 hours afterwards, you have an additional, like, muscles are already sponges for glucose, but they become like super sponges for 24 hours after you lift weights. There's additional receptors. They're called GLUT4 receptors, and they start acting like super sponges to absorb the glucose and bring it in. So um, it's a nice way to allow for a lifestyle that I think is more sustainable. Okay, cool. I can have carbs in the future. Yeah, most likely. Let's get you there and find out. So
That's why I think your program is so neat, because it's just so tailored. It's not just
yeah,
this, it's this and that, and good luck.
yeah,
I like
yeah.
it
I
that
mean,
it's very highly tailored, and it's a gradual, because for a lot of people, this already is just the calorie reduction in its own is already a huge lifestyle change for many people. And then you talk about, oh, you're going to do fasting, you're going to cut out carbs, and you're going to do that. It's just, it's so overwhelming. And I like it that your program is more of a gradual, like, hopefully you can do everything. But if you can't, we're going to take baby steps to get you there. So this can be something to change your entire life forever.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I think you really hit the nail there. So
But on the insulin resistance, to help reverse it. So you have the fasting. Is there any other types of things that you implement maybe in your program to help bring or just bring the insulin resistance in reversal?
yeah, I mean, all 10 pillars do, but what is going to be the most powerful interventions for most people in order, in my opinion, would be the fasting, the keto, the eating less processed foods. Those are going to be the big three. And, keto and eating less processed foods, I talk about them separately because they're really two different dietary kind of things, interventions, but nutrition, right? So if I bundle those together, it's the approach towards nutrition, which is being a healthy keto, fine, and then fasting, and then resistance training, actually trying to build muscle mass, then getting your supplements in so that you get your key essential nutrients like essential fatty acids, and fish oil is just insanely important. Vitamin D, magnesium, a good broad spectrum multivitamin to cover your basics for minerals. Um, so many more supplements, situational, but those are just some of the base. Like, I think those are the big five. But then even as we go down the other pillars, they could be the reason that a person is able or not able to become insulin sensitive if you don't address those. Inflammation, their hormones, stress, sleep, like. So those are the orders of like priority, because I think more people need to focus on the front end, but the back end, like, if you have a crazy stressful situation in your life, well, we talked about that already. That's going to be the reason why you're not going to get better. So ultimately, all humans will benefit from these 10 pillars, but there's a certain priority that we try to identify for them to focus on first, because, like, Rome isn't built in a day, right? Like, this is a lifestyle that we're trying to build for you so that it becomes ubiquitous, like brushing your teeth, like you just do this, what you do, you know that's the goal, so that it's just sustainable and permanent.
How long does it take to become non-insulin resistant? Or is it even reversible 100% or not?
Great question. I think that's a phenomenal, like, debate And I'd love to see some experts, some scientists that know far more than me to answer that question. But I wouldn't say I don't care. Of course I care. I'm fascinated, but it's a mute point. Whether you reverse it, whether you put it into remission, I think that's the discussion there. Um, I 100% think it's at least remissionable, if I can say
Okay,
that, right?
fair.
Like we can put it into remission, we can measure that. Now all of a sudden the insulin levels that were elevated all the time, now they're low. And now they only rise when you eat. Okay, great. Well, you want to call that remission or reversal? I don't know. I don't care. Let me know because I'm excited. But yeah, I mean, but if you ask me what I thought the difference is between remission and reversal, I think remission means, and I say I think because I'm not positive, this isn't standardized anywhere, but I think remission means the problem is handled, but there like the fire is put out, but there's like a spark that can reignite, it's much more sensitive to go out again versus true reversal means it's completely gone. You can still create another fire, but now it's got the normal amount of propensity or potential to become an issue again versus sensitivity to becoming an issue again. And I think that's where the genetic base comes in. If you have a certain amount of genetic base obesity, you're always going to have more sensitivity to become. I believe I do. I think I mentioned this before. My fiance says if she's eating dinner with me and I haven't had an injection of a microdose for like 3-4 weeks, she can tell because
Oh,
she's like, and I love she points this out because I'm always fascinated too. She's like, I can see a difference. Like you're eating more like just versus just eating. It's interesting when she pointed that out. I'm like, you're right, and so I think there's something to be said about that for sure. So anyways, that's just my history and kind of what I deal with personally. But
no, it's interesting and it's relevant. I mean, you're somebody who's on these drugs too. It is very relevant, and it's neat to always have some, a second set of eyes, trying to help us all figure this out because this is a relatively new space.
oh yeah, no, it totally is.
Okay, so you mentioned some other things, and people may not have seen the other podcasts. Can you explain some of the? Just I know it's a huge scope of what you guys do over there, but can you explain some of the stuff that your clinics provide an average person for anybody
Yeah,
unfamiliar with it?
absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll end it off here. So my medical providers, we prescribe the GLP-1s. We prescribe all the main peptides. We do bioidentical hormone replacement therapy for men and women. And I have some really awesome women's health practitioners. They work with men too. Men are easy to balance. Women, like a woman should go to a women's health practitioner. A man should go to whoever they want because it's just a lot easier to balance a man's testosterone as long as the person has experience with men, in my opinion. So we balance both men and women, and then we do really cool like kind of niche things like the low dose naltrexone and whatever anti-aging therapies kind of come up. We're always looking into this and trying to optimize our protocols. And then on the whole other side of it, kind of what I do is the coaching. So the coaching is where I focus. And we have multiple tiers of coaching, all the way down to just, and by the way, we just launched, I'll give you access so you can check it out for yourself. Like we're off of the Facebook group. We're into the new platform. Flow Academy membership is live, which I love. Welcome to the fam. Anybody who ends up joining from your audience. It's a platform the platform's called Mighty Network, but it's like any other community app and platform. It's got all the bells and whistles. This is a really, really sophisticated platform. So I have now my base membership, which for anybody, it's $27 a month. And that gets you access to the community. That gets you access to the private chats. That gets you access to the flow protocol guides. That gets you access to Dr. Jones' rapid fire Q&As, which is really cool because the app notifies you even when you're not in the app. So whenever I go live, you're in my community, bam, you can hop on and catch me for some rapid fire Q&As, which is awesome. Anybody who gets just GLP-1s, like you're getting that. So you're getting minimum baseline, an opportunity to get the protocol and get some amount of guidance, which no one does that.
Yeah.
That's just not heard of. And then I have my actual coaching tiers: student, warrior, chieftain. Student is my larger group. And then my warrior is my main. That's my bread and butter. That's the one that I push the most because it's not as expensive as my one-on-one. One-on-one is just more if you want to have that kind of access to me, all the time, great. But the chieftain or the warrior is my we do small intimate Zoom calls where you can actually talk to me, what kind of struggles you're having. But we do it in those small, tiny little groups where you learn a lot, and you have all the perks of the students. So the unlimited consultation and access to my coaches in between. We call it the Flow Hotline. Access to the Flow University with all the courses, everything, every video and every training I've ever done is pre-recorded and organized for you. You get specialized onboarding courses, which here's a full protocol, but it's orientated to you as a rapid fire start guide and course. So all that's kind of tailored if somebody wants more access to me. And then my goal for everybody, once I get them fixed, is to get you back into the lifestyle, because the lifestyle isn't just my entry level coaching tier. It's actually my maintenance group. So when you finish your coaching with me, when you're close enough to your goal where you think you got it or you want me to get you all the way there, lifestyle for $27 a month, I plan on keeping you there for the rest of your life and keeping you at that optimal insulin sensitive level, which is really cool, right?
Yeah.
Because now if you have like, Jane, who just had a bad month and she gained 15 pounds. Now she gets to go on a Zoom call and everybody gets to watch. And how did he identify the problem with Jane and what was the issue and get her back on track? And because it's such a community now, I can afford to charge such a low price for that. And my confidence in the Flow protocol is why I could do that, because I don't think I'm going to have that many people that are going to actually need that level of recovery because we fixed the baseline issue. This goes against the complete basis of obesity and weight loss space. It's like everybody gains their weight back because we've always thought it was all about calories, right? And in my opinion, when you get the hormones fixed, mainly insulin resistance, weight maintenance becomes a reality, not a guarantee. It becomes a possibility and a reality. And the only research that we've ever done on actual lasting weight loss, which is so rare, by the way, I call them unicorns, because most people have never been able to maintain weight loss. And that's proven in the research, separate studies. But the studies that I'm talking about, where they actually looked at the unicorns, like how did they freaking maintain their weight loss? And it was all mindset. They exercised every day. They never stopped counting their calories. They had a really good supportive community and environment. They had systems to develop to prevent anxiety and depression. Like, okay, great. I just have to have like, who the heck's going to exercise every day and count their calories every day? Like, it takes insanely mental tough traits when you're not thinking of insulin resistance, right? Because now now we're really tying everything together. The mindset can override the body if the person's mentally tough enough. Well, that's why they're unicorns, because that's a tough feat. Most people are not. Their body is just too powerful working against them. My approach is let's fix the body as much as we possibly can so the body works with you. We're still going to train on mindset. We're still going to make you mentally tougher, because I think we got to hit this from both angles. We need mental toughness as much as we need a more compliable body. And that's the ticket to lasting weight loss.
I agree. That's why you're the GOAT.
Thank you so much.
You really are.